Hi. So when I started designing this character for the Monster series, I kind of had a few touch points that I wanted to touch on. Now, this isn't a monster, it's a robot, but I wanted to get into the same vibe as some of these classic monster things. So, of course, I looked at The Day the Earth Stood Still. This was one of the first things that came to mind with the sort of towering being with the death ray. And then it was Metropolis. The robot from Metropolis was, and the whole Art Deco vibe was a big influence on this character. And lastly, I decided to weave in one of my favorites, actually my favorite robot of all time, Giant Robo, from the anime Giant Robo, The Night the Earth Stood Still, the greatest anime of all time. Don't at me. So let's get into the creation of this character. We're going to go pretty quickly through this one. Everything is more or less by the book. So if you are new to the channel, please go back through a couple of the previous monster characters. Maybe start at the beginning with Dead Larry and work your way forward. And I'm going to talk about the ideation. One of the big things for me on this was focusing on making a robot that has some humanoid aspects and the Art Deco aspects and not trying to make it super organic. There are aspects of her design that are organic, but they aren't organic in the sense of kind of like future-y metal armor robot-y stuff. It's more like an organic thing of using that ribbed section to actually look like ribs, when in reality that's just maybe an Art Deco embellishment. Same thing with what's going on with her shoulder. The shoulder curves in a general way like a shoulder, but it's also much more sculpted. The idea is that it is like a sculpture. Her head is, of course, also bizarre. This is where you can see me trying to figure out where I'm going to go with this head. And I'm like, man, I needed to have something kind of like Giant Robo, and then I was just like, dude, I'm just going to put an Egyptian thing on the front of it, just like Giant Robo. And the thing that's really interesting about that is this character is tied in with another character that you can probably figure out what the archetype for that one is. That's going to be coming last. So in my last video, I said that there were 3 more characters from this lineup. Sekhmet here is one of them. And then we bring back the Bigfoot from the video that you all saw where I sort of concepted in real time the sketch phase of the Bigfoot, and then a final character, and that's the last character for a while. So this character's name is Sekhmet 2. She is a defense and sort of like pursuit robot. Pursuit, obviously, not like running down the street, but she, the idea is that she protects someone or something. You can set her to do that, and then she will utterly chase down and destroy whomever it is that violates that protection or attempts to violate that protection. The spirit behind her, as I mentioned in the beginning, was sort of trying to speak to things like Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still and Giant Robo, and try to weave in all of these robots, these like classic robots. The idea that this robot is like a beautiful statue in some ways, but then when you actually imagine it moving, it probably doesn't move great. She has a lot more mobility than a character like, say, RoboCop, but she is not as agile as like a Evangelion unit, as an example. So for her palette, one of the big things that I wanted to focus on was having her be super muted and just kind of like dull metal. Even the more gold, kind of brassy, bronzy aspect of her metallic elements is really dulled. The idea there was that I just didn't want her to be crazy shiny. I wanted her to feel like she came out of one of these old movies. There's very little like mega shiny metal in these things, and I wanted to try and capture that. This is also starting to be powered at this point by some of the Giant Robo influence that I decided to bring in. Giant Robo's metal is a dull gray metal. Here we go a little bit darker than Giant Robo, and it kind of changes over time, but the spirit of it is still the same, that it wasn't a shiny, chromed out, fancy thing. It's got more of this, bygone era vibe to it, this atomic robot type vibe to it. Part of the merging of elements from the Art Deco stuff and then like the giant robo influence is we've got the Art Deco aspects in that little bit under her, sort of like she's got like this shoulder pad almost, then right under that there's like this seashell embellishment. She's got this big chest plate that has this Art Deco-y vibe, the ribs, the fins, I guess you could call them, that are on her forearms. But then when we get into things like her hands and her face, actually her face is kind of a bridge. Her face is kind of a bridge between Giant Robo and the Art Deco stuff, but like her hands are just very much Giant Robo. I didn't directly copy them, but Giant Robo is almost completely ingrained in my brain, so I probably came really close without, sourcing it kind of. Then here's the other hand. The way we've got these layers split up is we've got the entirety of the back arm, the entirety of the back leg, and then we've got her like pelvis, torso, and head, I think, all on one layer. And then we've got her leg that's close to us and her arm that's close to us on one layer. The thing is, I did everything in this flat metal, and then I just added modifying layers on top. So this is actually like a rich orange gold that's been lowered in opacity. But I then eventually swap it out for a full-fledged color. I just color pick it. In fact, you're going to see me do that in a second here. I'll just color pick it and then refill it in with that, and that's what just happened. And that's because I was realizing that I was going to have to put in some embellishments that I was too lazy to sort of like capture when I did my initial flat, and I wanted to have full control without having those transparencies pop up all the time. Here I'm just using the symmetry tool real quick to do the thing on her forehead, that Egyptian inspired symbol on her forehead. Her eyes are also inspired by some other characters from Giant Robo. So all in all, I'm just trying to capture different aspects of different robots that I think will be really, really cool, and get them all to play nicely together. So ultimately what I end up having as far as metal is concerned is like a lighter, slightly shinier, more silvery metal, and then kind of like an iron looking metal or steel, and then a like brassy, coppery kind of metal. That's where we end up. And then the gold, the thing on her forehead stays gold in order to draw more attention to it. And then her obviously fiery, bright eyes. Okay, so story time. I mentioned that she's a protector. And I mentioned that she will also pursue whomever she, needs to. The story with her is that she actually used to be the protector for someone who's bad, and she is concerned that at any point she could be rewired to be bad again. There was an event that happens that severs her from the person that she was originally meant to protect. She then gets rewired, and she, quote-unquote, joins the good guys. And then she tries to stay really logical about the fact that, there's no way that I would ever go bad again, but then at the same time, she is like sort of secretly concerned about it. So how are we going to handle something like a robot in this universe? I think that, the universe is meant to be flexible because the universe is meant to just be fun and to not be too caught up in its own bullshit. So I would say that different robots could be handled differently based on whatever the mood is that we're trying to capture. For this robot, the idea is she's got a fairly robotic sounding voice. It's like let's say a 50-50 between robotic and human, and the way she thinks, she has independent thought, but she has, similar to the Terminator, she can be completely independent, but she can also just be rewired. So there's no mystical aspect to her. She's just a well-designed robot, let's say. Well designed from the standpoint of she can think for herself, but that thought can be corrupted because she is parts, electronics, etc. So that's the gist behind her. She is tied directly in to the last character that we're going to have in this lineup, and the last character in this lineup is tied into Dead Larry. So we're going to bring this whole thing full circle, and I think I mentioned in the last video I'm going to do like a brief relationship chart. I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do like a character review video where we're going to talk about all these characters, get them all in a lineup, talk about the relationships, but talk about their design elements. I think that it's going to be a good video because if you're not interested in the story, because, you know, when will this ever be a show? When will this ever be? Yeah, I don't know either. But if you're interested in world building and sort of what goes into generating characters that have to have relationships and what is the world they exist in and all these things, that's what I'm going to try and focus on in that video. So I think you'll dig it. If you're somebody who wants to get into concept art, visual development, it'll be good. I think if you want to get into literally like pitching shows and coming up with shows and movies and stuff like that, there's aspects of it that are going to be good. I'm not going to be showing you how to build a pitch packet. I'm not going to show you how to write a script or something like that, but I'm going to show you from an art point of view how you can drive that world building very quickly. So that'll be in a video when we finish all of these monster characters. So we're going to finish her right here, and then 2 more, and then that video will come after that. As for the title of this video, Death Ray Sekhmet, so I wanted to try and capture something that was a little vibey, like a weird sounding title kind of, that would be memorable, but she does in fact have a death ray. She's got a lot of classic robot shit. One other thing that was a reference, but it wasn't really a reference in the design, it was more a reference in thinking about the potential of the character, was Iron Giant. Because I do really love, I mean, it's in Giant Robo too, but I love, like, for instance, at the end of Iron Giant, spoilers if you haven't seen it, last warning, when he goes ballistic at the end and he, like, turns into, like, a death machine, there's actually an aspect of that in Giant Robo as well, where he, like, does various things depending on the episode of the OVA. He, like, either opens up these slots and rockets come out, or he can open up this one slot and an arm comes down so he can fire off one of his jets and blow shit up. And then there's other characters, and even in, like, the Ginray OAV that's, like, hilarious, that's got some, like, really cool stuff in there with transformations and all that. And so all of that kind of stuff I think would be really cool. So I like the idea that her primary abilities are the ability to, like, hit and be strong and take a shot and stuff like that, and then her eyes can do eyeball lasers, but then she also has some of the other, you know, fun shit that you hope to see out of a robot, like, oh, I didn't know her wrist opened up, or I didn't know her chest plate came off and, like, a rocket came out of it, or like a laser like Iron Man, or I didn't know those fins on her hips come off and she can throw them like a blade, or whatever bullshit, you know. It's like that, it's like her version of shark repellent. It's like whatever she needs at any point for the story. Or actually RoboCop does that, right? Like, I just was recently watching I don't know, I just get lost on YouTube sometimes, and I was watching a video on the truth or fiction about RoboCop, and apparently there was a RoboCop show that I don't really remember, and he, like, you know, his right leg opens up and he's got a gun. In the show, his left leg opens up, and, like, whatever he kind of needs in any episode is in there. Like, if he suddenly needs an explosive, or he suddenly needs a yo-yo or some shit. So I think robot characters are fun in that way, because you can either design them super realistically, or you can have fun stuff like that where it's like, you know, she turns into a rocket and flies all of a sudden. It's like, whoa, where the shit did that come from? So that is the gist behind this character. We are at the stage in the video where we're doing the ambient occlusion pass, and then soon we will be moving on to the cast shadow pass. One thing that I want to point out is when we get to the lighting and we put in the little shines, I actually paint in the shines the normal way, but then I go back through with, like, a noisy brush. I don't remember which one it is, but, like, one that's just got kind of like little scratches. It might be like the Hessian one or something, but anyways, you can do this however you want. But what I do is I go in with the brush and I paint in the highlights. It's like, okay, those highlights look pretty good, and then I go over them one more time, same color, same layer and everything, and I just very lightly apply a little bit of those scratching and noise, so when the light is hitting, it's implying that there's some sort of a texture there. I didn't really do that in the shadows. Actually, in the old days, my old days, when I used to do a lot of painting, I would do lots of texture stuff, and I still think that is, like, fun, but I kind of, like, got over it, and I moved into doing just capturing different details and caring about different details. So I don't do it that much anymore. But in the highlights is where you can really get a lot of bang for your buck. Like you just put a highlight down. You can actually experiment with this. If you take like a sphere and you paint it just one way, you just, you know, standard soft brush, make it real smooth and make it look like it came out of like 3D Max like 20 years ago, and then do different shines, just practice different shines, like a little pin light shine, and then you get like a softer shine, and then you do like a shine that's got cracks in it, and then you do a shine that's got scratches or like a different texture or whatever. And it's funny because even though the shadow should be doing some of that as well, having the shine do it, it's like all you need kind of. And in the case of this character that is like mostly smooth, but then we're just trying to pick up these little imperfections that the light might be catching, that's where the shine really comes in for getting those details. We aren't even to that point yet. When we get to that point, I'll sort of point it out. Point. One thing I want to also highlight here is her eyes. If you're keeping track, these characters don't actually really have any visible eye direction. They all just kind of have a glowy eye. There's no direction to it because there's no iris, there's no pupil, it's just a big glowy eye. She does though, and that's just because I wanted her to be kind of unsettling. I don't know that she's entirely unsettling in this illustration, but I like the idea of, you know, she's standing there, she's just being perfectly still because she's a robot. The characters are discussing something, and then one of the characters turns to her and says, "Oh, what do you think about that?" You know, just trying to be chipper, like maybe it's Lucy or it's Crystal from last week, and they're like, "What do you think about that?" And then they look at her, and then she doesn't move, but her eyes look down, and it's just like that sort of like, oh geez, there's a giant laser shooting robot in the room. That kind of vibe I thought would be really cool. So instead of having her eyes just glow and having her have almost this completely empty vibe to her, I wanted her to have a little bit more intent. Now, that's kind of an interesting notion, right? It's like with some of these other characters that are allowed to emote and their faces move and they can be really expressive, you can kind of do less with their eyes. With a character like this, we're getting rid of all of that expression. So it's like, okay, well, let's put it back in through the eyes. The eyes don't move, like she can't blink, she can't lower her eyebrows or anything. But that at least gives her something that we can play with. Okay, so you saw that big blue streak go by. That's me establishing what I'm going to do for the highlight. We're starting on that distant arm because we're moving through our layers like we always do, so that we can, you know, go up through our layers and it'll result in one layer on the top that does all of our highlights, so we can keep that layer count down. If you want to understand what that's about, in the description there's a link to a video called Select Paint, Select Clear that I think will clear that up for you. Something that's kind of interesting about this character, something that I feel like I try to rely on with this lineup, is crazy colors and a lot of facial expression and things like that. Maybe not for all of them, but certainly for some of them. And this character just kind of standing here like this big just statue. Simplistic in color, only real serious colors in the eyes and the background, and she looks almost like she's a part of this like destruction kind of that's around her with that like red glow that ends up happening, and it just really kind of sets like an ominous tone for her that I think is really cool. Here we're gonna pop really quick. You're gonna see some of that texture I was talking about, boop, right here. And so that kind of like little scratchy bit as a highlight is going to be really successful in selling the material there. At the very end, when we do like the slow pan through, I think you'll also see it pretty well there. Here we're doing some of our vignetting and the kind of shadow. There's like the vignette shadow and then the edge shadow that we talk about in all of these monster videos, which is another reason why I want to end the monsters so that we're not talking about the same thing all the time. We get some swirly bits down below, so she looks like she's just sitting in the destruction right there. So we're at that stage now where things are going to kind of flicker on and off. I'm going to be going through and making sure I've got like all of my reflection set. Now, as you know, if you've been keeping track of the process of these characters, we have two major things left to do with this character, which is going to be the rim light from behind. You see that subtle light, that orange light coming from the background, and then we're going to need to capture the light from below. So her eyes are red, yellow, orange kind of thing, but for this one I decided to just really sort of soak her in her environment. So we just go with that straight kind of like red vibe from the background so that she can just really, again, feel like she is lit from destruction. So the way we do this rim light is we're just painting it in with white. We're painting it in and just following the contour and the general geometry of the character. When that's all done, when we feel like we've got that light in nice and good, we're going to select it and then on a new layer fill it with orange and then blur that orange layer. And then we'll actually duplicate that orange layer and put it underneath as well. So that way we've got a sandwich. We've got like blurred orange, hard white, blurred orange, and then that top blurred orange we make an add layer, and then we adjust those two layers, the two orange layers, so that we get the right amount of glow. Here down at the bottom you can see that we start with an orange light and then we're like no, let's make that red. It'll get color shifted in a second. There you go. And at the very end I did do some tweaks to her distant eye because I thought it was a little bit too small, so we just kind of fudged that a little bit here at the very end. Right there, all done. And so this right here is the final version of Sekhmet 2. This character was very exciting to work on because she was just so different from all of the others. The last two are going to be getting back to sort of like classic monster stuff, but I thought that she just had to come in and represent like sort of like robot sci-fi. Let's take a look at the sketch real quick. So pretty simple, but I had to figure out some key things. She had a little bit of a tighter sketch than some of the others. And then again, here is the final version. And then just for funsies, let's look at a black and white version that makes it kind of look like a retro sci-fi situation. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like. If you don't subscribe, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you on the next video. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are several places where you can find me.